Hey everybody, Coach Toolshed here, and today I need to bring you a video sort of clarifying one of the points I made yesterday. There was some confusion, some misunderstandings, and really that's not even the right word to take because really it's a failing on my part. I didn't really explain myself fully in the video yesterday, so I want to expound on the topic a little bit and sort of bring you some clarification as to what I actually meant yesterday when I was talking about God of War, Red Dead Redemption 2, and the length of games and DLC practices. Now, one of the things I said yesterday is that I really appreciate the fact, yesterday's video was sort of a look back on the year in general at 2018, and one of the points I brought up is that I really appreciate the fact that God of War got so much recognition, not for the quality of the game necessarily, although it did get recognition for that, of course, and not for the critical acclaim, the user reviews that everyone just, well, not everyone, but a lot of people generally really enjoy that game, but that wasn't my point. My point yesterday was that I was happy that a single-player game that was of a length of gameplay that you could actually digest, the average gamer could get through the game. I really appreciated the fact that it was a shorter game that still had dozens and dozens of hours of gameplay available, and also the fact that it did not have DLC. And I said yesterday that I'm pretty much just sick and tired of DLC, and I'm sick and tired of long games. And one of the games I mentioned was Red Dead Redemption 2. And this had a lot of people questioning, saying, hey, I like long games, I like DLC, what's your problem with it? And that is the issue that I did not really further clarify in my video yesterday. So let me just get into this now. What I am trying to say isn't a problem necessarily with games being over 100 or 150 hours long, and it's not necessarily a problem with DLC in and of itself. Some of my favorite games of all time are games that I've played for 100 or 200, 300 plus hours. That's not the issue. Some of my favorite gaming experiences that I've ever had are also in DLCs. Now, some DLCs suck, but that's besides the point. I still do enjoy these games. It's not a problem I have with game length necessarily in and of itself. My issue is, if you go back to 2011 when Skyrim came out, that game really changed the gaming landscape when it came to open world games especially, because after that it turned into, well, every game needs to be comparing itself to Skyrim. And every game developer had to compare their game to Skyrim. Oh, the map's the same size as Skyrim. Oh, it's twice as big as Skyrim. It's 4 times as big as Skyrim. Oh, our game has over 150 hours of original content. Blah, 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 blah. And you especially saw companies like Ubisoft start going down this road and start bragging about the sheer map size of the game and the hours and hours of content they would provide. And this became ubiquitous as we've moved through this decade, especially since Skyrim. You could also point to Rockstar games like GTA and Red Dead Redemption 1 as sort of laying this groundwork, but I didn't really see this sort of trend truly explode into the gaming scene until after Skyrim, and people saw that games of that length could make a ton of money. You even saw really popular games like The Witcher 3. When they were marketing it, they weren't comparing it to other games. They were comparing it in scope and focus to Skyrim. And you saw this for years and years on end. Oh, every game compared itself to Skyrim. And this led to a situation where all of these major publishers, and even minor, some smaller publishers, and some smaller development studios, they all started making open world games where they could sit and brag about the sheer map size and the sheer amount of hours involved with their game. And this led to a lot of situations where games were just being artificially padded with useless, nonsense, filler side quests just so they could say, hey, there's 150 hours of quests to do, even though most of us playing the game would get sick and tired of this after just a few dozen hours because we realized we were just repeating the exact same activity over and over again. Also, when you get into these gigantic maps, what you have a lot of the time is just a gigantic landmass that doesn't justify its own existence. What do I mean by that? Well, if you have a map and there's just gigantic masses of empty spaces in between, and nothing really happens when you're out there. You're just traveling from point A to point B for 5, 10, 15 minutes at a time. Now, this is something that can happen in a lot of games. There's games like Assassin's Creed Odyssey this year, where sometimes you can go on a quest and you are just traveling and traveling and traveling. If you haven't unlocked that fast travel spot yet, you can be traveling for many, many minutes just to get from one mission checkpoint to the next. Red Dead Redemption 2, I would argue, also suffers from this, and I would say that Red Dead Redemption 2 is actually a prime candidate for this topic of what I'm talking about. When you look at this map, my problem is not with the way the map looks. It looks beautiful. The game world is gorgeous. It has so much detail. Everything looks fantastic. It is one of the best looking open worlds I've ever seen. My problem is that when I'm given a quest and my next mission checkpoint is going to take me on a 10-minute straight horseback ride of just non-stop riding, listening to the horse beats. Sure, you can say that that's immersive, but for me, I don't see why they couldn't have told this exact same story, had the exact same amount of content as far as quests, side quest, NPC activity, all of that, and still done it on a map at least half the size of its current map. Now, this might be a bit of a spoiler, but if you haven't played the entire game yet, you will get to the point near the end of the game where you and your group head into an area that is basically the entire map from the last Red Dead Redemption game, which was already a very large open world. Now, it wasn't as large as some of the open worlds that we've seen in the past few years. It was back in 2010, so it was still kind of small compared to some of the other games we've seen, but it was still, if you go back and look at that map, it was huge. It didn't need, Red Dead 2 does not need to have a landmass that it appears to me to be about 4 times the size of Red Dead 1 and still tell what is generally, the story is great. I have no problem with the story. But my point is that you could have cut probably, this is not really much of an exaggeration, I don't think. I think you could have cut the length of this game in half if you would have just had a smaller map for people to traverse. Now, several months ago, after E3, I did a preview video for Dying Light 2. It's a game that I'm really looking forward to next year, and one of the things I really, really appreciated about the first Dying Light game is that it had an open world that was digestible and still provided about 50 hours worth of gameplay. But by the end of the game, you knew that entire city in and out. If you just spun your character in a circle, did a little 360, you would know pretty much exactly where you were located in relevance to the entire rest of the map. You knew exactly where you were, you knew where to go, there were landmarks, you knew that map inside and out. It's also something you had with the older Grand Theft Auto games, Grand Theft Auto 3 and Vice City. Those games as well had that. It was a large map, but you knew it totally by the end of the game. Now, we have moved past that point in dramatic fashion. We're now at the point where in many of these open world games, unless you're in a city that has a distinctive style to it, you may not have any concept of where you are at any given point on the map if you just looked around your character. And that's why we see the ubiquitous mini-map with the GPS system in nearly every game. Now, of course, there's options to toggle that on and off, which works fine for some games, but in other games it really doesn't work well at all because you can't find your way around these massive maps sometimes without a GPS system in a mini-map. That is something that I think is ludicrous. When you look at a game like No Man's Sky, now that granted this is an example on the extreme end of things, but I think a lot of times when you want to try to prove a point, if you look at the extremes of any situation, it can show you exactly how wrong your thinking can be about certain things. And so when you look at a game like No Man's Sky, when it first launched, did that game not prove that sheer land-mass and map size makes no difference whatsoever to the quality of a game. It's the gameplay itself. It's the quests and the objectives you have to do that really make the game stand out. It's not the sheer size of the map that does it, and it's not the sheer length of the game either that makes for a quality experience. And if No Man's Sky at vanilla launch doesn't prove that point, then I don't know what game would. But that to me is a perfect example of a game where the size, scope, and length of the game is totally irrelevant because it didn't provide that gameplay structure that most people wanted to make an enjoyable experience when it first launched. By the same token, when you play some of these Ubisoft games that take, over 100 hours to beat, it's just mind-numbing the amount of extra travel time and nonsense filler quests that make up the time just so they can point to, hey, look how big our map is. Look how many hours of gameplay you have. That to me is pointless, fluff, nonsense content that I don't have time for. Now, I know some people told me, and this is something I can totally sympathize with. Some people said, hey, well, I only buy a couple games a year, so I want my games to be 100 hours long. Well, that's totally fine. And as I said at the start of the video, my problem is not game A, say Red Dead Redemption. My problem isn't that Red Dead Redemption 2 is over 100 hours long. My problem is that these long games have become ubiquitous throughout the industry. You can't swing your arms without hitting a game where the developer is bragging about the map size, bragging about the game length, when to me those two things are totally irrelevant when it compares to the gameplay and the story and everything else that goes with it. I care far more about world detail than I care about world size. It's irrelevant to me. Also, when it comes to me, I want to consume as many games as I can in a year in a reasonable amount of time. I want to try and play all of the games that I have personal interest in. And when every game coming down the line is either a 150-hour open world game, or worse yet, the games as a service titles that take hundreds if not thousands of hours to grind through, I simply don't have the hours in the year available, and I'm sure most of you don't either, to sit and play all of these games. Which is a shame because there are a lot of games I would like to get through. And like I mentioned in my last video, my backlog is enormous. I have dozens of games that I have barely touched or sometimes not turned on at all because I'm still trying to get through some of these previous games. Now, you can say that that is sort of a useless problem and I should not complain about that. And hey, that's a fair enough point. You can make that argument. But for me, I want a reason to play all these games. I want to be able to play a game and beat it and put it down with a satisfied feeling. I don't like having the feeling hanging over my head of, man, I'm not done this game. I'm not done this game yet. And the next game I want to play is coming out in a couple weeks. And now I'm like in a panic mentally during my gameplay trying to be like, okay, I got to get through this game. I got to get through this game because this other game's coming out that I also want to play. Now, this is a problem with me, with impatience. I'll be honest. This is a problem that I have. But I don't think I'm alone in having this issue. I think there's a lot of people that buy games and then they're looking forward to another game and then they just sort of rush. They're like, okay, I'm just going to grind through the story real quick. And they blast through the story just to get to the end. And they don't really savor the games like they used to. Now, when I look at Red Dead Redemption 1, I've said this in previous videos, that's one of my favorite games of all time. I would say is definitely my game of the year from 2010. And I sunk hundreds of hours into both the single player and multiplayer components of that game. I love that game. And when it comes to Red Dead 2, I think in many, many ways, Red Dead 2 is leaps and bounds ahead of Red Dead Redemption 1 in a lot of ways. But one of the things where I think it fails is the pacing. And it's not the pacing of the story, or the pacing of the missions, or any of that. It's the problem of the map size being too big, which is artificially padding out the experience to make it seem longer than it really is. This game could have been just as good, and I would contend better on a smaller, more condensed map. That's my point. Now, that's the long way of getting around to that, but I'm also going to use a similar line of thinking when it comes to the DLC question. Now, a lot of people also mention the point to me that they like DLC. They like having extra content for the games. Now, once again, this is not a problem with DLC in and of itself. My problem with DLC is these days, every game seems to have planned DLC that they announce ahead of time. We saw especially with the Spider-Man game this year, where they were already rolling full trailers for the DLC before the actual game launched, which to me was just mind-blowing. My issue with these games is that I don't think every game just automatically deserves to have DLC or expansions. I want these games to be made full and complete before they start even thinking about manufacturing DLC. And I don't think I'm alone in that thinking. My real problem is that I only want games to have DLC if they've earned that. I want these games to launch and get good critical reception and get good fan reception, and I want the fans, the players, the people paying for the product to say, hey, we want more of this. I don't want the developers and the publishers saying, hey, we have more content coming, so hey, give us an extra $30 for this expansion pack that will have, I think we can all agree most of the time, will be questionable quality at best when it comes to a lot of these DLCs. Now, of course, there's DLCs that are fantastic. A lot of those are standalone, but there's also expansions and regular DLC throughout the years that we can all point to and say, hey, this is really good DLC. For me, some of the old Fallout DLCs were really good. I really enjoyed the DLC for BioShock Infinite. I think the DLC for that game really just made the experience that much better once you play through, because you sort of get the full end of the story. You have some good DLC for The Last of Us. Games like that. Shivering Isles, back in the day with Elder Scrolls, was also a well-renowned expansion. And of course, The Witcher 3 had the Blood and Wine and Hearts of Stone DLC, which people really enjoyed. So it's not an issue with DLC. My issue is when you have games that only sell middling amount of copies and didn't really get great critical reception. They maybe only have a 75 on Metacritic, sort of a middling game, and they're sitting there selling you an expansion pass or a season pass before we even know if the game is of decent quality. Who knows if anyone's going to even want to touch your expansion packs by the time they come out, because your game has not proven that it's worthy of that extra income. And I don't want to talk about monetization for the companies right now. That's a whole different topic, and that can go another 30 minutes. I'm not going to do that here. But my issue with DLC isn't DLC itself. It's that it's become so pervasive in nearly every game. And the point I made in my last video was I loved the fact that God of War doesn't have DLC. Because I played that game, I got 100% completion, and I've done everything to do in that game, and I can put that game down without feeling like it's hanging over my head saying, Coach, you didn't finish me. Coach, you didn't finish me. You're only at 75% completion. I'll be like, no, but I rolled credits. I rolled credits. No, Coach, you're not done yet. You're not done yet. You still have side content. You didn't do this DLC yet. Maybe you got the Platinum Trophy or 100% completion on Xbox, but we got DLC now, and you didn't do it. You didn't do the DLC. Now that's a bit of OCD on my part. I can agree to that if that's your contention. Totally. That's on me. But that sort of thing gnaws at me. There's games that I have that are from last generation that I still have gnawing in the back of my head saying, Coach, you never finished me. And I'm just like, I know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I never went back and got that one last achievement or that one last trophy. And it drives me nuts. And the reason why is because some of these games with the DLC, it's unnecessary. You look back at last year, and you look at a game like Horizon Zero Dawn. Now that was a game that when it came out, they said that they had no plans for DLC. they weren't planning on doing it. But when the game came out and got such good reviews, and the fans in general really enjoyed that game, and it had a lot of praise coming from critics and players alike, and there was demand for more, then they said, okay, several months later they said, okay, we're going to have some DLC that we're making for this game, because there was demand for it. And it was post-launch. They weren't trying to dangle it over our heads at the start of the game. You just had to buy the game. It was a full quality experience. It's one of my favorite games from last year personally. I know not everyone liked it, but for me, it was one of my favorite games of 2017. And so I was totally fine with purchasing that DLC. Fast forward to this year, and you look at a game like Far Cry 5. Now, Far Cry 5 was selling its Season Pass ahead of time. They already had it all planned out before the game launched. They knew exactly what the episodes were called. They knew everything about those DLCs before they came out. And you even had the media hyping it up because they're still living off the dreams of Blood Dragon from Far Cry 3, even though we've had multiple Far Cries since then where the DLCs haven't really lived up to the full billing, I would say. And if you go back and you look at my review that I did for the DLC pack for Far Cry 5, for me, it was one of the worst gaming experiences of the entire year until I played Fallout 76. But the Far Cry DLC for this year was abysmal. And it's something that I got suckered into buying. I paid an extra, I think, $30 for those 3 episodes. And honestly, only one of them was even halfway decent, and the other 2, in my opinion, were just some of the worst content I played the entire year. And that is my issue. Far Cry 5 actually did get a lot of praise, so there probably would have been some demand for that DLC. But if it was something that they concentrated on after the game came out, maybe they could have given us something that was a little bit meatier and a little bit more worthwhile to play. And if you go back and you look at some of the other reviews for those DLCs, you'll see that I'm not alone in thinking that those were really some terrible DLCs. So that's what I'm trying to say when it comes to DLC and the length of games. It's not a problem with game length necessarily, or with DLC necessarily. It's that every game started incorporating these things into the game to the point where you just can't get away from it. And I was commenting, the only thing I really wanted to say in the last video was that I really appreciated that God of War got away from that and still sold a ton of copies and got a lot of commercial praise, critical praise, fan praise, and it sold a ton of copies and made Sony a lot of money. And look at what happened to the director, Cory Barlog. Now he has elevated his own status to the top of the game directors pantheon, I guess you could say, because of that game. And I really appreciate the fact that it didn't try to sell me a bunch of extra bells and whistles. It didn't keep reaching its hand in my pocket, asking me for more time and more money, but especially more time. Because I'm at the point in my life now, I'm not rich by any stretch, but I have a little bit of disposable income, so I can buy more games than I was able to previously. But for me, it's just the sheer amount of hours that all these games involve. I would love to support more developers by buying games that I like and playing their games and talking about their games, but I simply can't get to everything because every game is such a time sink. Now, was Red Dead Redemption 2 the best example? No, probably not, because there's so much that the game does right that criticizing it by saying, oh, there's too much of this game, I can understand where people would say, hey, coach, that sounds really stupid to me. I can totally understand that, but I hope this video sort of clears that up and erases any question you may have had about that video I had. I hope that you maybe still don't agree with what I said, but I hope that I've explained myself more clearly in this video. So thank you for listening if you've made it this far. Now, I'm hoping tomorrow, there's a couple more videos that I wanted to get out today. I'm simply not going to have time to get to everything today. I'm hoping to maybe do a double upload tomorrow night, tomorrow afternoon. I'll have to see how it goes because there's a couple of topics that came to me today and on Christmas that I feel like I really have to get into right away. But like I said, I simply don't have time tonight. So I'm hoping to get into those tomorrow. But anyway, that's it for me for this video. I've rambled long enough. I'm Coach Toolshed. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Did I explain this properly to you? And if not, please come back to me, ask me some more questions. That's totally fine. I love having a dialogue with you guys down in the comments below. But anyway, let me know what you guys think. Please subscribe if you want to stay in tune with the channel headed forward. And as always, keep it turned to 11.